I did the closings. So I learned a lot. So I was able to gain all those gaps that were happening out in the actual closing table and help our network of agents to be the very best out there. So I did some myself. I was the one-man show. I mean, I was a solopreneur. And the way we gained some of those clients, it was by delivering an exceptional customer service so they feel confident in the level of service that we were going to provide to their clients, which was their main focus, right? And then after that, every time they moved, they took us with them. So we never really had to pay for advertising. We were the marketers, right? How we did business different than everybody else was what made our name. And then after that, it just spread like a wildfire.
Yeah, that's awesome. And there's a lot to be said for customer experience, right? David, you and I were talking about that earlier, about you can have an amazing business, but if you don't have a good customer experience, no matter how much money you spend on marketing, or, you're just not going to be as successful as you could be if you had a good customer experience.
That's really true. And I just want to piggyback on something that Madeline said. Is one of the things that when we were making that first decision to go into the entrepreneur space and open that business, we looked at it, and I tell clients this now. Sometimes in the down market is the best time. If you've got the money to invest, right, and you have the time to invest, you can really change an industry, because what most legacy companies are doing is contracting. And now you're growing. And when we hit that market, first of all, it wasn't a large number of companies like us. There's a lot more now than there were then. But people were like, wait a minute, you do this. And we positioned it as a way of helping them reduce their costs by allowing them to expand their capacity. So the really good companies we were working with were able to go out and talk to more companies. So it really is sometimes in the business world, you have to look at it. It may not be the euphoric time to open a business, but it may be just the best time.
Yeah, you've heard Warren Buffett say you need to buy when there's blood in the streets.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
true.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And we started
Without knowing.
And then, when we got our first national client, that's a story for another day. But it was really exciting, because that's when we started really growing. And we moved from. We always had an office. We never really wanted to run our business out of the home. So we had an office, and then we had to expand, and we had to hire, and and so it was unique for our business. And the one thing that we committed to is really always delivering an exceptional experience. And in our industry, in all industries, it's about communication. If you're not communicating with your client and your customers, and in our case, our clients had clients, and it was our client's customer. So we had to deliver the greatest experience to the customer, even though it was one of our agents doing it, but we had to make sure we were managing that whole flow. And that's really what built our brand, is not only do we have industry experience, and we were able to handle the questions that were coming in without needing additional guidance from our clients, the customers came back and reviewed it and said, this is amazing. We need more of this. And so that's to me, that's what it's all about in any business. It's, delivering an exceptional experience that will really, it's your own best advertising. One of the things, as in business and in personal, since we're business partners and we've been married for 23 years, that whole understanding of roles was critical. We learned this early on, that she's the visionary and I'm the integrator. Initially, though, when we first started doing stuff together, it was like we were tripping over each other, not understanding why. And one of the first things we do is we try to figure out what role the entrepreneur really is. And then we do this whole resource assessment, and then skills assessment right around that. So we really find out where they should be playing in the business,
Right.
so that they are actually maximizing their opportunities.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. In my business, I'm the visionary, and Jasmine, my daughter, is the what'd you call? I started to say executioner. That's not it, but
Integrator.
Integrator.
integrator. Yeah, she makes it all happen.
Yeah.
I have an idea, and she's like, "Oh, not another one."
So funny. There's 2 times that there's a few words that I really do not like to hear, and it's usually right when I wake up and right before I go to bed. It's, I got an idea. And I'm like,
Or I was thinking.
Yeah. And it's just like,
Yeah.
not now.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this sounds like a lot of work. Yeah. I get that from Jasmine.
But if she didn't have them, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Run across business owners who maybe they were a chef or they love to cook, and so they opened a restaurant, but they didn't know how to run a business or market a business, or a dentist or a doctor. They're really good at what they do, but they don't necessarily know how to run a business or market a business. It goes across all fields. So having people like you guys that can really say, hey, you're good at this, stay in your lane, hire somebody that's really good at what you're not good at, and watch yourself soar. And I think a lot of business owners that are just starting out, including myself sometimes, have a hard time biting off payroll, right? Like, oh, but I could just do it and save myself this amount of money. What do you say to people that have that hurdle to get over?
So
good.
2 things. I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead. The bootstrapping.
We have this discussion all the time with clients. Yeah. It's about bootstrapping, right? And there's the first thing we do is we say that you can build a business by bootstrapping. It's going to probably cost you more, and what I always tell people is this: if you don't have time to do it the right way the first time, when will you have time to redo it? And so what we do is we talk to them, like I said earlier, about what role they want to play, what are their skill sets that they have, what can they do, what can't they do, what should they do, what shouldn't they do. And then we tie that to a number and we put it to an economic term. And we explain to them, if you are going to do this and you're still working in your business and you're trying to work on your business and you're trying to do all this, there's a cost to that, and they have to understand what that cost is. And 90% of the time, the cost is less than the revenue that they could earn if they hired somebody to do it.
Right.
And get it up quicker, right?
Yeah.
So that, and we were talking about this earlier, and the whole manager versus owner concept, and that's really where Madeline comes in, is really helping newer entrepreneurs, especially the ones that you just described, where it's a chef and I'm going to open up a business. Well, you're probably wonderful running a kitchen. Running a business is different. So moving from that mindset of manager to owner, it's a game changer. And it was for us because we both came out of corporate.
To have coaches who come in and say, in my first month, I did $1 million on whatever. And you're like, wait a minute. Well, how many times did you fail? Because I need to know that when I fail, you can lead me back to success. And, just knowing y'all's story and how many times you've been successful, I know that there's been failures along the way where you fell forward, maybe flat on your face like me, right? I always fall flat on my face, but when I get up, I'm a little bit, a few feet ahead of where I was when I fell the first time.
Yes.
And I think that that's really, that's a really good coach for people that have big goals and aren't afraid to take risk.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can be afraid. And you can, it's okay, but do it anyways.
Yeah, do it anyways.
Do it anyways. And that's always been my thing. And so, I'm not going to say I have never been scared or I had fears about what the possibilities, but then you know what? But what if I succeed, right? I mean, so it's a 50-50 chance and you have to be able to take that chance.
Last night, it was interesting. We were at an event and I was listening to somebody, and I wish I could take credit for it, but I didn't say this. And she said, how many people have great ideas but never write them down, right? And how many people say, I want to try something but don't do it?
Yeah.
And if we can inspire anybody to at least talk to somebody and see if it's viable, right? Or maybe today's not the right day, but are there things that you can do to prepare to be ready for it? I think entrepreneurship is an interesting thing. You have to be ready for it, but the best motivator is when you weren't planning for it, right? Because you have no alternative, right?
Yes.
And when you have no alternative, that gives you drive.
Yeah.
And so use the fear. The fear is good.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Afraid is a pushback, but fear, that tells you to be concerned, right? It gives you energy. And so I don't think it's a bad thing. You should always be confident, but
Well, it keeps us safe,
Yeah.
right? That is just an emotion that keeps us safe. But we have to be able to tell ourselves, it is okay, fear. Talk to fear, right? It's okay, fear. I am safe. I can do this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's just understanding who you are, what you're about, and really your convictions,
Yeah.
right? How bad do you really want
and you
it?
just saw the unique difference between the two of us right there.
I see it as, if you're going to parachute out of an airplane, you have people who they want to unpack the parachute and make sure that it's doesn't have any holes in it.
That's him.
And then you have the thing about that though is if you unpack the parachute, you're not going to jump off the plane.
That's right.
Because you just unpack the chute, right? Yeah. So you have to have you're going to have fear. You're jumping out of an airplane, right? Especially if it's your first time. But you have to have enough trust and confidence and have people in your corner that pack that parachute well for you.
Right.
Even if you fail, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's not a permanent failure. Like, it's gonna be okay. And David Meltzer, a friend of mine, he talks a lot about he lost over $100 million. Talk about a fail. Like,
Yeah.
I every time he tells that story, I'm like, oh my gosh. And then got right back up and made it back tenfold, within a few years. And so I look at people like that and think, okay, if you can fail that big,
Yeah.
I can handle the stuff that I'm going through and keep going,
Absolutely.
right? Great to
Yeah.
have mentors in your life like
Well,
that.
it's one of those things that, you know what? I feel confident that if I fail and lose money, I can stand back up and make it again because I still have the ability to do what I
Exactly.
need to do.
Yeah.
It is when it's a one-time wonder or one-hit wonder, right? And then you're like, okay, what do I do now? I lost all this money. I'm just going to go and be in a fetal position in the
Right.
corner. No, I mean, money is money.
Yeah.
You'll make... Just go
But
make
that's
some
what
more.
you've learned from that's when I said those people are like, oh, I made a bunch of money in 1 month, and I'm like, well, you can't coach me
Yeah.
because I need you to have failed before, and that's where you
Yes.
get that confidence that if I made $1 million this month and lost it all next month, I'm okay because I've learned enough lessons through my lifetime that I know I can make it again. I've been in executive roles and in just business roles where I was the only woman, and I would be at a table or in a meeting, and all these men in the same color blue shirts.
Yes.
And I would look around and they would literally say to me, like, I should feel lucky that I'm there. And I'm like, I don't feel lucky because I'm the only one. Mm-hmm. Like, this has to change. Why am I the only one here? And I think a lot of times what we've seen, and hopefully this is changing, these younger generations than us make me so proud. I just love everything they're doing. But in my career, there were a lot of women who they felt like they had to hate on you to get closer to the men, to get up that level, or they were all gossiping together, and if you didn't want to be a part of that group, then you were shunned. And so I found myself in that category a lot because I had no interest in ever tearing down another woman, but if you weren't part of that group, then you were better than them, or you were judged for that. And I think that's part of the reason why your story really settles with me very well, because I love women. I love people. I want everybody to succeed. But I'm also very intentional with the energy I have around me. And so, me wanting the best for everybody doesn't mean that I'm going to take less. And I think that's a good lesson that you put out there as well, is that we can all have everything we want and need without taking it away from each other.
Right. Absolutely. I learned that afterwards when we implemented self-care, even with Hey Chica, because I started to see that the things I didn't like in other women were the things I didn't like about myself. So when you start to do that internal work with yourself, like you become very open to other energetic circles, and you no longer hang around the people that probably weren't your friends anyway, that you're like, you kind of outgrow, still love them. Mm-hmm. But I think that's where we are as women. I think we're going back and healing ourselves and finding ourselves. And then that's showing up in the boardroom, in the conversation. And again, the young people who are really going and saying, you know what, this is not me, this is not who I am. And they're really peeling back the layers of things that we've sort of hid behind. Mm-hmm. And that's so important because now I can walk into a boardroom and feel confident with who I am. It doesn't take anything away from anyone else, regardless of it's a man or woman. Because I think that that's also another important takeaway that I hope that the listeners know is like, it's not men against women. It's not the empowered group. And that's not the way to go into it. Although we do have a louder mic, and we have an opportunity and a platform now, we still have to interact in our role in the community, in society, in a corporate boardroom. And that's so important. And we have to start to think in that way, but be smarter about it, and then get the resources that we need so we can excel at it and master that journey if that's the one we're taking in whatever place we're in.
Yeah. I've always thought there's just so much education and diversity. If you stay around people that are just like you, what are you ever going to learn? So, I say that a lot. We do promote that we are a woman-owned company, right? So they're only less than 8% of CEOs in aviation are women. Less than 6% of CEOs in Fortune 500 companies are women. That's a big part of our mission at Stella Jets, is to empower women and let them see themselves in these roles. Even as pilots, when you say pilot, the instant picture in your head is a gray-haired white man, right? And so just putting a new face on it. But that absolutely does not mean that we don't, love and appreciate and learn from men that are in these positions, have been in these positions. I have a ton of mentors that are retired pilots, and every one of them is a man. Not every one of them. We have several females, but it feels like it sometimes. And that's such a good point, because you have to learn from diversity. You have to learn from people that are different than you if you really want to grow. If you are not open to learning from people from different cultures and different religions and all of that stuff, then you're going to grow a lot slower, right?
Right. Or you're going to grow into fear, or you're going to grow into hate. There's so many things that attach to that. And I'll just use this example that's so important. I have, a 7 and a 9-year-old at home, and my 9-year-old's like, my master chef 9-year-old's like, Mom, I think I'm just a tomboy. And I thought, no, you're not. That word was used because I was so traumatized by it, because I like playing football and I like playing baseball. So they put me into the boy category.
Right.
And I'm like, no, girls do that too. So I'm reframing that and telling her, no, that's not a tomboy. Girls do that too.
Yeah.
But it takes work, right? And it takes for me to understand that in myself, to accept that I'm not a tomboy. That's not a boy thing. That's just sports girls who play sports or whatever, or like to dress a certain way. And I think that's where we're at now. It's like we're always having to educate and to be open to it in order for us to set up our next girl for success.
Absolutely.
And that's hard, right? Because we got to do the work.
Yeah.
Because our beliefs and our past is still there, telling us to say this, do this.
Right.
But the magic is when you're detaching from those things that you thought were true.
Right.
And then changing the narrative and then pouring in. That's powerful to me.
Yeah. And I think just like all the categories, right? Like this is for girls and this is for boys, that were lined up and they were taught to us and ingrained in us. Really what it did is taught us to judge ourselves.
Yeah.
Really harshly, on both sides, boys and girls. And so, I think it's really empowering that it's like, you are just you. You don't have to be you as a girl category, you as a boy category. Just love yourself, accept yourself, and give yourself the freedom, especially at your girl's ages, to develop into the best you can be, and not try and judge yourself every step of the way.
Absolutely. And the grace that comes with that, right? Because I might not be this person in 5 years. I might run into something else. Trauma may happen to me, as everyone has trauma that exposes them. Yeah. And I might be someone else. And I have to be okay with that growth, because it is growth. If we're tearing skin every day, we're tearing, beliefs, and we're just kind of exposed to a lot. But how do we get to that higher self? And it's just the opportunity in an open mind. Beginner's mind. I use that in my yoga sphere, right? The beginner's mind, and saying, I'm going to walk in this with the beginner's mind, with no attachments and no fear, and just let it do what it does.
I've never been overestimated. That's for sure, right?
Yeah.
And I've definitely never overestimated myself either. And that's exciting, because as much pride as I have in who I am and what I've accomplished and who I've, mentored and all of that kind of stuff, it also leaves me excited because I know how fast and how much more I can do. And I would really love for you to share kind of your story, because none of us started where we are, right? And some of us started on different paths and different levels, and we're just, able to grow into these who are our authentic self, despite of ourselves. So I would love if you'd share more of your story.
Yeah, I love that. And because no one expects it, right? They look at me and they're like, oh, what? That happened to you? It's the cat with 9 lives, right? You just, I was pregnant at 14. My dad was in the Mexican mafia. My dad was in a drug gang, like in Austin. So I was just raised in the streets, and then would live half time with my grandparents, who were very Mexican, like cultured. And so I was just kind of trying to find who I was at the time, and felt validated in a place where, I didn't know any better. And I got pregnant when I was 14, had my kid when I was 15, right when I was going into my freshman year in high school. Unfortunately, that wasn't uncommon. There was like 3 or 4 other girls that were pregnant in junior high, because I went to a predominantly Hispanic and Black high school. So that was not uncommon, although my grandparents had better expectations for us. Yeah. And my mom was a young mom, so it was a generational thing. But during that time, I didn't feel I was a victim to it. I think I've always had the spirit of optimism. And I knew that watch me do it. I was like, I'm going to do it, and it is what I'm going to just make my life the way it is and survive. And I think it was always a survivor's mentality, because I was coming from poverty. My parents were evicted. I went to 13 elementary schools. I share that, how we'd come home and there was all our clothes outside. And so the resilience of the bounce back was always something, unfortunately, that I was used to. I wasn't not exposed to it. So the fear of that never happened. I think I didn't have fear until I faced my grandparents. And this is where the shame comes in. When we were raised Catholic, and it was like, you're going to get married. This is a shame thing, So I married my high school sweetheart, my first, child's dad. And it was through the Catholic Church. And I had to do all the things that my grandparents believed religiously in the community. We didn't want the community to put our name in the bat, So many things that come with that. When you go back and look at it, you're like, who gives a crap, at this point? Yeah. But I was honoring those traditions and the rituals that I still honor to this day, and I respect. But it was hard. My grandmother tried to choke me when she found out what is going on. And my dad and my mom were just still trying to figure it all out themselves. And I went to college, and I graduated high school. I was the first to graduate high school in my family, the first to go to college, and still none of my family has gone to college. So I was still out there trying to prove that I'm still the good daughter. I'm still the good person. You still raised me well. And despite my father and my mom's indiscretions, they still had this beautiful person that they raised. So I was always trying to show up for the community, the family. But the struggle was real. Like getting married at 18, it was hard. Going to college with a brand new baby, and all I had was my car, and I drove to South Carolina from Texas. My dad was upset, tried to kill himself when I left. They couldn't believe I was abandoning the family and going to college the night before. Wow. So before I even got in my car with my kid and my husband at the time, and driving to South Carolina from Austin with nowhere to go, we stayed in a hotel. So it sounds fake. And it's like, these are real stories of how the struggle takes place, but the resiliency at the end is greater than, the struggle. And so that was my life. And I went to school, graduated, and my daughter went to college and high school with me, and she's 31 now. But I go back and I look at that. I'm like, how did I do that? Because I talk to my husband now, and he's like, I wasn't even thinking about that. In college, having a kid and having to work 2 jobs and wait tables and pay daycare and then study. And I just think that you kind of know that there's a bigger mission in your heart, that there's a purpose, and you just kind of explore that journey. It's hard. I can't imagine. I know people, single moms now, I'm like, how do you do it?
I know.
And I have more resources now, but I'm still like, wow. Yeah. That we really can do a lot more than we think. And it takes a strong heart and a mind to navigate that in a really, really strong focus and self-awareness, and then aligning yourself in the right places. So it's discouraging to hear that there's a lot of people that are struggling through that same thing. And I try to do a lot. Actually, my goal for the future of Hey Chica is to have a team mom sort of leadership something. Because I did have a teacher that ran our like teen mom program that we had to ship to. You know how you ship the bad kids to a different school or whatever. So I had to go in, do a certain amount of hours in that, and they would pay my daycare if I could do that. And I reached out to her recently. I'm like, are you still doing teen stuff? She's like, yeah. I'm like, I want to help. Like, how can I get involved? Because I think now a lot of moms, teen moms, they get sort of the book on how to get on WIC and food stamps. They don't get the book on how to get out of this and become a businesswoman, a corporate lady. So I think there's an opportunity, and maybe that's for me and you too, that we can explore. Because you're not discounted. There's no scarlet letter on something that happened to you, and you don't have to be a victim, right? You can be, the victor and still succeed and get out of this situation, or become where you can raise your child and feel confident and loved and successful.
I was talking with some friends yesterday, and mostly about teenagers, right? But we have some teenagers around us in our families, and we were talking about the difference between nature and nurture, right? And so when a teen, for instance, just as an analogy, when a teen hits a certain part of life and puberty starts happening and they start changing, and we're going, hey, they were helping me with the trash and telling me they loved me yesterday, and today they're like calling me bro and telling me get out of the way, right? What happened? And we were talking about how that's nature. Like, you can't be mad at them for what they're going through, because that's nature. But it's important how you nurture them through that, because a lot of times, we'll nurture too much. And then you have, I don't know if you've heard the saying, a man will become a man when a man is needed. And so a lot of times, there's 40-year-old boys, because they never had to be a man, because their parents, grandparents, family, whatever, coddled them, and they didn't have the responsibilities. And the same thing with women. There's 30-year-old women out there that are acting like 13-year-old girls, because we never allowed them or gave them the responsibility to become women. And so that's kind of been our conversation this week. And I was glad you were coming on, because I wanted to kind of talk about that. There's a lot of people now who need to get over things that were from, the best intentions, sometimes not good intentions, but there's so much that we drag into our adulthood, and our emotional maturity can kind of be stunted because of things we don't even realize. So I absolutely am on board with the coaching and therapy together. That's amazing, because like you said, you can have a coach. We can tell you all day long to take 100 million steps, or just 2 steps, and you'll better your life. But if there's something holding you back that you don't even realize is there, then all the coaching in the world isn't going to help. So, I'd love for you to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper.
Sure. Well, a lot of it comes from my own story. So interestingly enough, even in my life, I was a victim longer than I was a man who's living empowered. I struggled most of my life living in victimhood. I was diagnosed in high school with anxiety, depression, and panic disorder. I had a lot of suicidal ideation. I had self-harm tendencies. There were many things that I was doing to try and control my life, which seemingly felt out of control. And there were for many, many reasons. One is that I was ostracized. 2 is that I was bullied. I was rejected by everyone. I was a little bit fat. I was kind of out of shape. And so I was a very easy target. I didn't get any girls interested in me. Guys made fun of me. I got thrown in trash cans. I got pushed down steps. I mean, my whole life has been wanting to belong somewhere and never fitting in anywhere. And what I tried to do was reinvent myself. And I didn't do it very successfully. So in college, I had said, this is going to be my chance. If anyone's ever seen that movie, The New Guy, where the guy walks in and like, who the heck are you? And he's like, I'm the new guy. And he's the coolest kid in the school when he used to be a loser. That was kind of how my arc was going as well. And I got super fed up with my life in high school. And I was like, this is where I'm going to shift things. And so going into college, I wrote on all of my college transcripts my name as Vincenzo instead of Vincent, because I thought, 1, it was cooler, and 2, Vincent was a loser. I don't want to associate with him. I'm done with that guy. And it sort of worked. I started working out. I grew a beard. I had cooler clothes. And Vincenzo was just this everything I couldn't be. However, the issues never went away because I did an external shift, but the internal was still probably just as bad. So women would be interested in me and I would just not even know. They would go over to my friend. They'd be like, "What's up with your friend?" And what do you mean? Well, I flirted with him and he just walked away from me. And it's like, oh, that then he doesn't get it. Don't worry about him. Like, he's probably interested in you. Just go talk to him more. And so I always had these issues with women, and then even with guys, I had like, if the guys went out and they didn't call me, all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, like, do they hate me now? Like, why am I not getting the invite? And I started getting this anxious attachment style. And as college progressed, I seemingly was continuing to get worse and worse, so much so that in my master's program, I was having full-blown panic attacks. I wasn't able to make any decisions unless I called my therapist on the phone. I was trying to drop out of school. I was having like mental breakdowns. And life was so friggin' hard for me. And at about 23 years old, I finally figured it out. And that's what ultimately led me to stop playing the victim and start looking at how can I change the trajectory and the outcome of my life. Because ultimately, what you need to show people is that if they're in an unfavorable circumstance, if they're getting an outcome they do not want or desire, it's because they are either contributing to that, or by not contributing, they're still contributing to that lifestyle. And that is a hard thing for people to realize. And that was hard for me to realize, which is why I was seemingly stuck for so long.
Sometimes we're asking for a lot. You know, you mentioned Tony Robbins, and I'm a big fan of Ed Mylett and David Meltzer, as you know, and a lot of these speakers. But a lot of times it seems like a stretch when someone is so new on the path to learning themselves and making changes and realizing that they're the ones holding them back and they're doing the work. But it seems like such a distance to get from beginner stage to high achiever. What would you say would be the first steps if you were doing this all over again, knowing what you know now, but having to start over? What would you say would be those first couple of steps that would make it not necessarily easy, but probably a little bit more gentler slide to get way over here from here?
Sure. I have a question for you before I answer that.
Okay.
Have you ever heard the term up Schitt's Creek without a paddle?
Maybe. I don't know about Schitt's Creek. That's a show, I know. Yes.
So that phrase, right? It's always a funny one to me. I always found it hilarious, right? Up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. Now, it's spelled differently. I know the show you're talking about, but it's definitely spelled. This is the one that's coming out the other side of you. Now,
This is the emoji, right? Yeah.
yes. This is the poop emoji. But why that saying is pretty interesting is because, well, if you're up Schitt's Creek without a paddle, it means you're kind of screwed in the direction you're going. And so when I thought about that, it actually, to some degree, it brought up a analogy, or not an analogy. It brought up an acronym. It said, well, you might be up Schitt's Creek without a paddle, but what if you were in Schitt's Creek with an oar? So you could still use an oar to steer a ship, right? But my oar is ownership, accountability, and responsibility. Because to change your life, you need those three elements.
Absolutely.
And if you're living as a victim, chances are you're up Schitt's Creek without an oar. And so to start changing things, you need to develop your oar. Now, what is that? Ownership is the understanding. It is the first piece of transformation. I didn't tell you guys how I transformed at 23. So let me just give you a little context. I think your listeners will love this. So if you guys are listening, please take out a pen and paper. You're going to need this. Notes. So I had a moment. I call it my moment in the mirror. And this is where I was in my bathroom and I was completely frustrated with life. And I slammed my hands on the counter because I couldn't figure out. I'm 23 years old. I have my license to practice psychotherapy. I'm in good shape. I have a hot girlfriend. I have a sports car. I have a good paying job that I'm about to start. I have everything life tells me I'm supposed to have to be happy. Why aren't I? Couldn't figure that out. Made no sense, right? And so I really had to dig deep. And in that moment of utter frustration was what I call a moment of grace. It was my clarity moment that transformed and changed the trajectory of my life forever. And what that was I finally looked up at myself in the mirror and I said, oh my God, I figured it out. You're Vincent. Why is that so important? Well, if you remember from my story before, I said I changed my name to Vincenzo. I no longer wanted to be Vincent because he was a loser and he had life happening to him instead of for him. And who wants that? Kind of like being up Schitt's Creek without a paddle.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because I wasn't willing to embrace who I was, I could never change my life. But in the moment I declared who I was, it allowed me to take accountability. It allowed me to take ownership. It allowed me to start shifting responsibility. So then I had to ask, you're Vincent, but who is Vincent? So this is the first piece, right? Be honest. Who are you? So I had to answer that, and I had to answer it truthfully. I had to say, I'm a loser. I am not a leader. People pity me. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I hate my life. I'm suicidal. I'm sad. This was all true. And as crappy as it was to acknowledge, you can't change anything if you can't acknowledge it. You can't change it if you can't own it. So now that I owned it and I was willing to start accepting it, I can change the trajectory of my life, which brought me to the next question is, who do you want to become? So that's the second piece. Who are you striving to evolve into? Because life is about evolution. It's about process. So now that was another question that I had to give the answers to. And the answers were a lot easier to give. In fact, they felt better to give. So the question had the answers of, I want to be a leader. I want to be inspiring. I want to be powerful. I want to be excited. I want to be loving. I want to be strong. I want to help people. And then the last question, which is responsibility comes in, is how are you going to do that, right? What would a leader do? So now we get granular. How does the leader show up? What do they say? What do they think? What do they do? What are their behaviors? What are their actions? How do they make others feel? How do they feel? How do they show up in this world? And then I took all the things I said I want to become, and I got granular for each one. So in taking your ownership, in taking your accountability, and in taking your responsibility, you're able to start with where you're at, create the trajectory of where you want to go, and then live it out every day. And you have to believe it as you become it.
I needed to figure out what I was going to do, and found, later in life, the love of real estate, and really honed in and buckled down and said, okay, this is what I want to do from this point forward. And I'm able to provide for my kids and have a little bit of a flexible lifestyle. They say it's flexible, but we work really hard, being in top, real estate or anything you do in business.
I like how humble you are. No, I'm the only one in this room right now that knows you drive a Maserati.
Now she's out here calling me out.
From homeless to Maserati, but she still has an Android, so.
You got to keep it real. Got to be humble, See, here she is calling me out, people. And, I've done well for myself over the last 10 years. So, but I've definitely earned it and worked hard for it. But yeah, coming from that, there was a lot of failure was an option. Right. It just was not an option. I didn't have a plan B. I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't that was my path. It was either this is going to work out or it's not. Yeah. And, it's either, what they say, it's either you learn, or either you win or you learn. That saying, what you fall 7, but you get up 8. Yeah. And that was the thing that I was like, I don't care, I'm going to throw caution to the wind. And when you are someone that you have nothing to lose, you lose nothing. So you just have to go for it. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that's what I did. And, through the perseverance and grind and hustle and grit and not taking no for an answer and working 16, almost 17-hour days every single day, to create, this team and this environment of, winning and giving it back, to our clients and really servicing them and doing whatever we could, has been the focal point and the main driver behind our business. Yeah. And it's always been about the customer experience. Yeah. And you're right. There's 1,000 real estate agents on every corner. Yeah. But it's through that personalization and market knowledge. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's you have to know what you're doing and you have to know your stuff. Because again, if you don't know what you're doing, they have a million other people they can go to.
Right. So early on, it's, obviously you went through a rough patch and then you made a decision and then you committed to that decision.
Yes. Yeah.
But early on, you didn't have the same knowledge that you have now, right?
Oh,
in
absolutely.
Real estate.
Absolutely.
And it took a lot, I'm sure, of grit
Yes.
to get through until you were at a spot where you can do that and deliver some good customer service.
Oh, 100%. And when you're new, and this goes for anybody at any time, or doesn't necessarily mean real estate, but any industry, even the best experts, we're beginners at one point, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's okay to not know something, and it's okay to say you don't know something, but it's not okay to stay there.
Right.
So, you've got to learn from your mistakes, and you've got to, I remember I was in the office and I had a wonderful, JP who owned, has now since sold it, but, JPAR here in Texas. Huge brokerage. He was one of my personal mentors, and, he was gracious enough to take me underneath his wing and just kind of teach me. But I was just constantly like in his office and talking to him and calling him on the phone. What do I do here? What do I do here? I wasn't afraid to go there. I wasn't afraid, to go to the best in the industry to say, help me with this, and follow them around and be a fly on the wall. And what do I do? And persistence. You have to be persistent.
Yeah.
And just when you feel like, it's almost one of those things, just when you feel like you're about to give up, that's when the success happens.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And God, my first year in real estate, I sucked. To be honest, I was a fly on the wall, and I'm like, what do I do? And there's so much to do, and there's so many people, and how do I keep these transactions straight? And what the hell? And left, right, up, down. I'm like, you're drinking from a fire hose. And I think with anything, when you start a new business or new industry, there's going to be that learning curve. Yeah. And so, but it was just through repetition and repetition, and grind and grit, and just never giving up, and just having that ability of like, if I don't know something, I'm going to find it, and I'm going to find the answer.
And you did what most coaches, especially online coaches, recommend, which is go to somebody who's done it before.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Get a mentor.
Don't get advice from people who have never been where you want to go.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. There are a lot of people out there, and I will tell you this, there are a lot of people out there who have a lot of opinions on what you should or shouldn't do. For anyone, I don't care what industry you're in, judge the source, before you listen to the message. Is that someone you want to emulate? Is that someone you want to be like? And do they even know what they're even talking about? You know what I mean? Like, and some people have the best of intentions.
That's what I was going to say.
And
a lot of it comes from the heart, but they have no experience.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they don't know what they're doing, or they mean well, like, you know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about, but they do, they mean well, and it comes from a great place. But to get, to hear, in order to get to the next level, you have to, find those mentors who have walked that path before you.
Right.
And those are the people you need to pay attention to. And those are the people you need to follow their advice and their opinions. Everybody else, you're like, take it with a grain of salt. Thanks. I appreciate it. But,
and that's actually